Thank you very much, Alan. So, as we know, the core theme of the Ontario Economic Summit is recovery to growth and what steps are necessary to ensure that Ontario returns to robust growth. And government, which is the subject of this, obviously has a key role to play, but in ways that are perhaps unexpected. Provincial government accounts for about 20% of GDP. That's bigger than the manufacturing sector, the financial sector, the two combined. And in a series of recent papers, the Ontario Chamber of Commerce has been championing the notion of what they call public sector economy. That is the mix of private, public, and not-for-profit providers who deliver public services. And the Chamber is encouraging the expansion of the public sector economy by increasing opportunities for the private and not-for-profit sectors to deliver services through, as just mentioned, alternative service delivery. So the argument made by the proponents of this approach is that ASD, if it's done right, can improve the return on investment to taxpayers, it can enhance innovation, and ultimately can improve the quality and the accessibility of public services for Ontarians. So you can get the innovation and the efficiency of the private sector and stick it into the public sector. But, and this is the thing we're about to debate here, is alternative service delivery merely privatization by stealth? Is it privatization of things that maybe shouldn't be privatized? Is it replacing a public monopoly with a private monopoly? And are we setting ourselves up for something like another Orange or e-health? So our next panel is going to examine those questions. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce you now to our two panelists. So Josh Hjartarson, whose name I've been mispronouncing for about 5 years, is the Vice President of Policy and Government Relations for the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. Prior to joining the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, he was the Policy Director at the Mowat Centre. He's one of Canada's foremost thought leaders on the pressing policy challenges facing Ontario and facing Canada, particularly on this topic. And he was appointed to the faculty at the School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Toronto in 2012. Our other panelist is Warren Smokey Thomas. He's the president of the Ontario Public Service Employees Union. He's a registered practical nurse. He's been an OPSU activist for over 30 years, first beginning his leadership career as president of Local 431 at the Ontario Psychiatric Hospital in Kingston. He has participated in countless campaigns on behalf of OPSU members, and these two gentlemen have debated this topic before, and they will do this right now for you, and I welcome them both to the stage, Josh and Smokey.
Hey, Josh. Tony, my wife, is not a policy wonk by any stretch, but she's very engaged, and I told her what we were doing, and I was like, we're going to talk ASD with Smokey Holmes. She's like, you're doing what? In front of whom? So I'm a little bit intimidated, I have to tell you. Anyway, I digress.
Let me start with you, Josh, because you're kind of making the, in debate format, you're making the case for the big change. So help us understand what is public sector economy, and I in particular point to this document that everyone received on Emerging Stronger 2014 for Ontario, and I look at the recommendations, and one of the prominent recommendations is right on this topic. It recommends that government conduct a system-wide audit for opportunities to transfer public services to the private and not-for-profit sectors through alternative service delivery arrangements. So, Josh, the question to you, what are we talking about here?
Right, I love being quoted back to me. It's a serious form of flirtation, frankly. What we're basically saying is, look, government controls 20% of the economy. It is the largest actor in the Ontario economy. And the mix, the public services are delivered by a mix of providers. It's, think of your doctor's office. Think of, I saw Debbie Douglas at the back of the room. Think of the immigration, the integration providers, et cetera. The public sector economy is pervasive in Ontario. We make the point, we make several points. One of them is that government creates markets. It procures, it transfers money to through granting agents, et cetera, et cetera. But it's very passive in market design. It doesn't think about the incentives that it's creating when it actually does this type of activity. For example, even in those areas run exclusively by nonprofits, for example, in training and stuff, are you allowing those organizations that are really good, really strong to capture more of the market? So what we're saying is, let's not be passive about market design. Let's not be passive about incentives. Let's think about what is the proper mix of the private, not-for-profit, and the public sector in the delivery of public services. So that's one sort of aggregate recommendation. The second recommendation is that all across the world, industrial economies that are looking hard at meeting twin challenges. One is debt deficit. The second is growing demand because our population is aging. What a wicked problem this is. And ASD has been used by Australia, by places in the United States and UK as a response to some of those challenges, to actually enhance service level, enhance service quality, but at the same time addressing some cost issues. I guess my point is we talk about, Ontario is about 4 to 5 to 6 years behind in the austerity game. There's a tremendous opportunity for us to learn from the successes, but also the mistakes that other jurisdictions have made in terms of this so-called alternatives. And I can speak to the benefits of alternative services. They're numerous. If you think of what the public sector needs right now, it needs innovation and it needs capital, right? And these are two things that ASD can bring. Is it appropriate for all segments of the public service? Absolutely not. It has to be based on evidence. But the great thing is we have this opportunity to learn, and that's really what our work under Alan's leadership has enabled us to do, is look at other jurisdictions. What are they doing? What are the innovative models that they're introducing, and so on and so forth. And I think that this is a really one of many avenues that is going to enable Ontario to emerge stronger and to tackle its debt and deficit and actually do better.
And Josh, just before I turn to Smokey, I mean, you've sort of, I think, segued nicely in there. What are examples of things we could or should be doing that Ontario is not currently doing?
Sure. The one thing that I would say is ASD is not privatization, it's not outsourcing. ASD is an umbrella term for all sorts of new models that have emerged across the world with respect to partnerships with nonprofits, partnerships with the private sector. A good example is a social impact bond is a type of ASD. So ASD, one of the great lessons of Orange, one of the great lessons of our previous experiments that Andrea Horvath had alluded to, is that it's not just a cut and lift. It's not just taking a service and letting the private sector run it without proper governance in place. And that's really the focus of our research, is how do you design governance? How do you design to prevent Orange, and so on and so forth? A good example is in BC with BC Health Insurance. And I use this example a lot because it's so relevant in the Ontario context. BC Health Insurance, the back office, the reconciliation of payments for doctors, et cetera, went through this, I would say, crisis of confidence. Its systems were outdated. People would call. 50% of the calls were actually matched by a busy signal, met with a busy signal, so on and so forth. And the public had lost confidence in the service. And so BC, through an ASD arrangement, contracted a third party. And as a result of this, service levels have improved drastically. The costs have gone down. All public sector jobs and employment was preserved, right? I think that's a key part. And as a result, the contract's been renewed and the service has been expanded. And now BC has one service card for every single provincial service as a result of the innovations that provider brought. It's a brilliant story. OHIP, the back office processes are OHIP, are 5 decades old. You need capital, you need innovation, and this is an example of an ASD arrangement that I think that could benefit Ontario.
So Smokey, I turn to you. What's your reaction to what Josh has had to say? Josh says this isn't just privatization. This isn't just sort of chopping something and moving it, outsourcing it. Are you comfortable with that? Do you believe that? What are your concerns?
Well, he's a naive young fellow.
At least I got the young thing.
But I like him. Anytime you take public dollars and turn it into private profit, that's privatization. So my belief, my fervent belief, is that public services should be for people, not profit. Should the government look at what it does? Absolutely. They should have looked at it 20 years ago, 25 years ago. But I've known innovators to be in the bureaucracy in the government, and they get shut down because of political will. So we had two That when the Tories were in power, they're the ones that messed up the hydro system, they're the ones that messed up the hospitals. The Liberals have come in and it's been austerity almost since day one. So I would just like to give a shout out to Ed Clark. My leadership, we represent the workers at the LCBO, the only really essential service in Ontario, they say in bargaining. But Ed's group was very, very thoughtful. I was nervous as hell when the government started this. I thought they're going to sell the thing, right? And I kept saying to them, why would you sell the goose that lays a golden egg? So kudos to Ed, because I do believe in incrementalism. I actually took a course on it when I first got involved in the union. So, but on this one, we'd actually introduced a 5-point plan that the government should implement if they were going to privatize. We still think that's a good idea. And I got criticized by some people for actually putting forward a 5-point plan. But if the government's going to do it, we don't want them making mistakes. And they've made some horrifically expensive mistakes. Orange Air, Terranet, the things that people like you now call a success story, and maybe they are, but they cost the taxpayers billions of dollars in bungling. So I don't have a lot of confidence that the government and the private sector can get it right. I know when I phone my cable company or my bank or whatever, well, you can fix that, I'd be real happy, you know, so I get somebody to take my call in under an hour or two. Well, the private sector's not a hell of a lot better, buddy. So I am opposed to privatization. Social impact bonds are just a slippery slope to privatization because there's a bonus that some tax dollars go to profit. So if you can figure out a way to make me happy. I've actually met with the Premier. It was a rather rancorous meeting. But I also met with Deb Matthews. And Deb said to me 6 weeks ago, Smokey, I can prove to you that, because I always say, show me the proof of what you're saying. Show me the evidence that what you're saying. I said it to politicians of all 3 parties, including Bob Ray, who, by the way, he's like my dad. My dad's dead, but the older I got, the smarter my... Bob's just dead from the neck up. But anyway, the older I get, the smarter Bob Ray gets. I honestly hope people really pay attention to what Bob says. I have a lot of respect for him, I really do. And I have a lot of respect for Andrea Horvath. So I have no issue with the government taking an honest look at it, but there should not be inside the government right now. I'll give you one quick example. IT. We're actually doing a lobby day at Queen's Park on Monday because the government's been privatizing IT when after they built a data center in Guelph that can handle everything they have for data storage, plus half of Canada. And yet they don't use it. So they're contracting out IT services. They're going from about $40 an hour to $250 an hour for consultants, and my members are now spend their days fixing up the messes consultants make. So we got evidence. Lab testing. Mike Harris said hospitals can't do it. The Liberals said you can't do a community lab test. 50% more in the private sector. So it's not always cheaper, Josh. That's why I oppose it. And that's why I say, if you want to look at it, I'm not afraid to sit and look at it. I'm getting a little older and a little more mature and a little wiser and a little more patient sometimes. And that we should actually, you know, I'd like a table with Deb Matthews. I'd like a table to sit with the government like Bob Ray tried to do. And Labor's as much to blame as the NDP were back then for it failing. Labor, we made a lot of mistakes as well. But sit down and actually say, like, listen, because in the broader public service, you know there's 500 agencies in healthcare in Ontario. 500 agencies. So why aren't we looking at all that? The transfer out of government to the private and private sector and not-for-profit sector has been willy-nilly. So I read what you do, and to me, some of it makes sense. I just don't like the idea that taxpayers' dollars would go to profit.
So,
right?
let me pick up on that, and you know, Josh, this is an opportunity I think for you to try to put Smokey and other people at ease. As he says, there have been examples where arguably this has not worked. This has been a failure. It's been misguided. So help us understand how those failures will not recur and will get positive benefits instead of regrets.
Well, you know, the reality is that the traditional model for ASD has been outsourcing. And outsourcing implies a certain type of transaction and so on and so forth. And if the only tool, and this is stealing from Gary Sturgis, who we brought from Australia to talk about this stuff, if your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, right? The reality is you can structure contracts You can structure partnerships with the private sector to preempt many of the problems. And we're learning this now because the science of contracting, the science of master service agreements has exploded. It's exponential. And the UK and the Australia have allowed us to learn those lessons. Let me give you a good example. This notion of profit, the P word, if you will. I think it's a fair point. The last thing you want to do is have the public sector or the taxpayer get fleeced by a private company because they've introduced an innovation and the profit margins are like that. The reality is, and this is what's happening in the UK more and more, particularly after a couple of mistakes that were made, is windfall protection, right? Once you've reached a certain level of profit, a lot of that profit thereafter gets recycled back to the public sector. You can do gain sharing, right? There are ways that you can structure these arrangements to preempt, I would say, a lot of those concerns. And I think that's one of the things that we're really focused on. So one of our next steps, for example, is the UK has formed this commissioning academy within Whitehall, their provincial cabinet. They have people that go around and teach people the innovations that are happening, that can happen on contracting and commissioning. We want to bring the commissioning academy to Ontario for 2 weeks so that we can all learn collectively about how we can design these. So it preempts, I think, what are very, very real and legitimate concerns. Another point I'd make is, Smokey, you published your 5-point plan. We're very transparent in the publications, and they're sitting at the back table. We accept your 5-point plan. Outsourcing ASD cannot be about wage suppression. If that's the sole goal, you're going to run into disaster. Because what you're going to do is non-cooperation from the public sector. It is going to lead to some of these messes. So the goal of ASD is not wage suppression. It's not how you're going to generate long-term savings. How you're going to generate is innovation, business processes, creating diversity in the public sector economy so that companies can learn from each other, so that there's, one of the things that I picked up from the forum that we just had was public sector monopoly is probably not good, but a private sector monopoly is worse, right? And you can design a contract so there's diversity. You can design so there's competition, and so government is not beholden to a single contractor at the end of a 5-year period. So I think that there's actually a lot of ground that I agree that let's not do this willy-nilly. Let's sit down and look at it. And if there's a case for ASDing the back office at OHIP and meanwhile protecting successor rights, let's look at it. Let's unpack it.
So Smokey, is there, from what I heard you saying, this is not a giant absolute no-go zone. Is there common ground here with Josh, alternative service delivery that you could agree with?
I have 2 points. When the Tories were in power, they legislated away successor rights for Ontario Public Service, the OPS, right? Bob Brunsman actually said to me about 4 years later on a panel I was sitting on with him, he said, the biggest mistake we ever made was legislating away successor rights. You bastards fought us on everything and beat us on 98% of what we tried to do. And we did, I had to, that's my job, look after my members. So if there are successful examples, very small, of highway maintenance being contracted that worked because the company came to us and said, we don't want to fight, we'll take the contract, take the workers. So as fate would have it, Josh, next week in Ottawa, my national union is, we're having a conference on alternative service delivery privatization. We're bringing in labor leaders from around the world. That will give us their experience out of the UK and Australia, so I'll hear the other side, all the rosy stuff. So I'm going to invite you, if you can come to Ottawa, come on up.
I'd love to. My grandmother's there. I could do both.
I'll put some rose-colored glasses on you, and we'll get you to sign it.
Yeah.
Drink that union Kool-Aid, right? And so we're very, very serious about across the country in our national union. So just the other thing I'd like to say is, I do want to say thanks to Ed Clark and his commission for not selling the LCBO. There's a lot of talk out there that somehow Smokey Thomas wanted to buy the LCBO. Well, if you were going to sell it to me and I had the money to buy it, geez, well, I'd give you half. Why wouldn't we buy it? Yeah. Things, it lays golden eggs, the goose that lays the golden eggs. So I'm very happy they're not selling it. And I look forward to our people sitting with Ed's group and there are ways to improve everything. I don't discount that, right? So, so just to dispel the myth, because there's been stuff said by other labor leaders and politicians and some bureaucrats that somehow I was trying to buy the LCBO. I've always been steadfast. Don't sell it, but if you do try to sell it, I'll be at that table to look after my people. And that's what I do.
Go ahead.
I too would like to thank Ed. It's a big honor because I agree with that whole process Let's thank Ed. The whole process demonstrates precisely what we're advocating for, is let's look at the evidence. If the evidence suggests there's a case, let's do it. If there's not a case, which clearly suggests that is what the evidence tells us, then I think that we need to be, and so one of the core sort of macro themes that's coming is we need to change. In a context of a $10 billion deficit, $300 billion debt, rising demand for core services, we need to change. And I don't think anyone in this room would say that public service is not going to look dramatically different 15 years from ago than it does.
We can get rid of corporate welfare for a good start. Well, there's a lot of tax breaks that are there for corporations that were there because the corporate tax rate was high, and they're still there.
Right.
So there should be a review of the tax system for everybody. So
I agree.
The NDP did it, had a very good review of the tax system, got defeated before they got to actually do something with it. So all that work is there. But the real problem, Josh, in the world today, between myself and the government, is a lack of trust.
Sure.
Now, you cannot move forward unless you can build trust. I've always said that, right? So I met Ed Clark. We had some good conversations. He made some very valid points. He said he wanted to listen to the workers, and he did. We've now started to build some trust.
Yep.
The world, for people like me, the only thing I can really bring to the table is I'm not the smartest guy around. I bring smarter people than me, but we bring trust. Our words are bond, and that's what we look for. And I actually, in spite of your socks, I'm starting to like you.